This is the front section of a Caterpillar D350E Series 2 haul truck. It's got a 3406E in it. What I'm gonna do here is get this engine fired up. I need to run it up to full operating temperature, and I need to verify that it seems to be a good engine, that it doesn't have any excessive blow-by or low oil pressure or anything like that. And then if everything checks out good with this test run, I'm gonna pull the engine out of this machine and I'm gonna convert it for use in a different application. So it's gonna get a totally different front structure, rear structure, cam gear, flywheel, oil pan, and a handful of other stuff. This truck had major hydraulic problems. That's why they quit using it and ended up selling it off to me. That area in there where there's not anything is where the hydraulic tank should be. So this was all disassembled prior to me buying the truck when they were troubleshooting and trying to figure out what had gone wrong. There's normally a couple hydraulic pumps that run off the rear structure that would be mounted right in here. They're not there now. They were destroyed. That's where things went badly. But over on the other side, I think you can see that yellow pump over there. That actually looks like a pretty fresh pump that may still be good, so I need to remove that before I run the thing. I don't want to run it dry. Other than that, the transmission and torque converter system all seems to still be intact, and it has oil in it, so I should be okay to run it there. And here's a little better look at that pump that I need to get off there before I run it. And then I've got to pull the valve covers and bolt the rocker shafts back down too. I've already pulled the jakes off this engine, and I didn't bolt the rocker shafts back down when I did that, so I've got to do that before it'll run. All right, I've got that pump off there. Appears to be a pretty new pump, 433 7514. It's a gear pump, and it probably would have been fine to go ahead and run it with that on there, but that new pump needs to come off and go into a dry building anyway, so it's not a bad thing that it's off. Should be good to run it now as far as everything back here. I've still got the lube line going in to lube the rear gears, and I'm going to lose some oil out of these pump drive areas, no doubt. I'll just have to keep an eye on it and make sure I'm not losing too much. Got the valve covers off, going to take care of these rocker shafts. Something I'm noticing down inside this head, right there off the tip of my finger, you see that red? That's diesel fuel. All right, that sounds better. Had a battery cable unhooked under there. Coolant looks all right. Oil looks all right, and I'm pretty certain that it's got fuel in it. So I think I'm ready to fire it up. Showing 18,676 hours on the meter. So here we go. Primed on it a little, here we go again. Well, after about 3 rounds of cranking on it, I decided that maybe it's not a fuel problem after all, so I went and grabbed the laptop. And sure enough, I'm not communicating with an engine ECM. I've got the transmission ECM and the cap monitoring system, but no engine ECM, so let me figure out what's going on with that. Didn't take long to find the problem. Let me show you. The end of this plug is broken off and allowed that whole thing to come out, and some of those pins weren't making good contact. It was in there about like that. A little bit more than that when I first got here. I've got that rigged back in there. It's not in there very good, but I think it'll be good enough for what I'm trying to do here. And then I got to looking back here, just from that little bit of cranking that I did, it was already running quite a bit of oil out. It was going to be too much. I can tell once it starts, it's going to be just pouring out of there. So I rigged this up on here. That's just a piece of flat rubber with a couple clamps. I don't know if that's going to help or not, but That's all I can come up with. 3406E D400, that's the engine ECM. Here we go. That's what I figured. We got oil pressure. Alright, I didn't get to run it quite as long as I wanted to because I'm losing too much oil back here. But I got it a little bit warm enough to see that it's not going to have any bad blow by. It held good oil pressure the whole time. It sounds good, it runs good. I think that's good enough for me, so I'm going to go ahead and get it pulled out of this machine and start working on getting it converted over to what I need it to be. I'm going to throw this in here somewhere. I'll cut it out of the video later if I ever sell this thing or do anything with it. But anybody out there that's got a D350E Series 2, which is a 2XW prefix machine, straight D350E, which is a 9LR prefix machine, or a straight D400E, which is a 2YR prefix machine, and you'd like to have a spare transmission and transfer gear group or drop box, whatever you want to call it, I'm willing to sell this one pretty reasonable. I believe it's a good transmission. I can't guarantee that, but the price will reflect that. So if you're interested, shoot me an email, kt3406e@gmail.com. Alright, I've got started pulling this engine out. Not going to video a whole lot of this. It's not really video worthy. Just a bunch of nuts and bolts and lines and hoses, nothing real interesting. I'll take a video clip or 2 or 3 as I go along here though. Alright, I've got it stripped part of the way down, getting ready to clean it up. This is all the stuff that came off of it. None of that's going to go back on. Most of that will all get replaced with different stuff. First thing I'm gonna do here is get the torque converter off of it. So I've got the rear of the engine supported there by the telehandler, and then I've got the torque converter by the chain hoist. This one's coming apart quite a bit easier than the last one I did. It's already about 1/3 of the way apart. So I'll get that split on off of there, and then I gotta pull the entire rear structure off of it after that. Nothing bad in the pan at all, which is good because I need this to be a good engine. A little bit of water in there, but that's just from pressure washing. I had that hose off there, so a little bit of water got in through that fitting. It's real nice and clean in here. And the rods have got a 0R3780 number on them, which is a reman number. That tells me that more than likely this engine has been overhauled. I thought there was a pretty good chance that it had because it's got a new head on it too. All right, here's where I'm at now. I just pulled the oil filter base off of it. I've got to change that out for a different one. And I'm getting ready to pull the entire front structure off of it. Every bit of it's got to come off all the way back to the engine block and the cylinder head, even the inner gear plate, and all that's going to get changed out for different stuff. I've got everything that needs to come off of it now. This is the flywheel housing that I need to go on it. I had this one fixed up at a local machine shop here in town a while back. They put inserts in 3 or 4 of these holes. Looks like they've done a pretty good job. So that thing is all fixed up and ready to go. I'm gonna throw that on there, and then I need a flywheel too. I'll dig one of those out and throw it on there. Okay, I've got everything for the rear of the engine cleaned up and ready to go now. That flywheel is not nearly as worn as it looks. That's just because I hit it with an orbital sander before I washed it. That ridge is only about 10 to 15 thousandths. I've seen them get way worse than that and still be running. Wouldn't hurt to service it, but that's not for me to do right now. On these Z models, I always put a real light film of anaerobic sealant on the gasket sealing area back here. A little bit of anti-seize on these dowel pins. Those are steel dowel pins going into an aluminum flywheel housing. Alright, the rear of the engine's all finished up and ready to go. Got a gear plate right there cleaned up and ready to go on, and a front cover. I'll tell you about that front cover here in a minute and why it's that weird shade of reddish, pinkish orange, whatever that is. That thing's been around here for probably 7 or 8 years now, but I still remember where it came from. Front of the block is all cleaned up, ready for a gasket. And I've got some timing gears and the nuts and bolts for those cleaned up and ready to go. These are not the timing gears that came off the engine. I'm not going to use those here. Real light film anaerobic sealant on the block, ready for a gasket. I don't do that on a C15, but I do it on a 3406E. I've got the 3 stub shafts on now. The lower 2 are torqued to spec with Loctite on all the nuts and bolts. Every single nut and bolt that goes on the inside of this front cover gets Loctite, with the exception of the 6 cam gear bolts. Do not Loctite those. The upper stub shaft is the adjustable idler gear stub shaft. So those nuts and the 1 bolt are just snugged up right now with no Loctite, because I'm still gonna have to adjust the backlash on that. I don't have any idea what the guy was thinking that painted those yellow lines on the cluster gear there. There's no reason that you would ever need to do anything like that. There's only 1 set of timing marks on any of these 5 gears that are here right now that matters, and that's right down here. There's an upside down V on the crank gear, and there's a corresponding line on the cluster gear that need to be timed. The manual says to time those, but it does not give an explanation as to why. Only thing I've ever been able to figure is that apparently the cluster gears are made a little bit off balance on purpose for some reason, and that's where it needs to be timed in order for the off balance part to be in the correct spot. I don't know that that's right, but I can't come up with anything else. You don't time these engines using timing marks on the gears like you do a lot of other engines. You time these by pinning the flywheel and then lining up a dot on the cam gear with a mark on the front cover. Alright, I've got a little bit of anaerobic sealant on the back side of the gasket and on the front cover. And I've got a little bit of anti-seize in the dowel pin holes in the front cover too. Alright, front cover's on, just got to get the bolts put in it and torque those. The reason it's got that weird orangey red paint on it is because it was originally on a 6BR industrial engine that was, according to what I was told at the time, in some kind of an air compressor. So I don't know if it was that green color first or if the green was just a primer or what, but that's the story on that. The thing's been around here for 7 or 8 years now. Of course, the rest of that engine's long gone, but I still had the front cover, and now it's finally getting used. I always put anti-seize on the shank of these 2 studs that come through the front cover too. Front engine mount is on. Water pump is bolted in. I'm getting ready to put the suction plate on the back of it. Here's that suction plate cleaned up and ready to go. The O-ring seals on that face right there. Alright, I've added a block stiffener plate to it, and I've got the correct oil pickup tube on it, and the pan is getting ready to go on. I've got the oil pan on it, I've got a fuel filter base on it, pump drive is in, fuel transfer pump is on, I've got the cam gear on it. There's always a bunch of questions about these cam gears, and I always forget to put it in a video, so here it is. The rollers are in the cam gear like that for torsional vibration dampening. These are MEUI, mechanically actuated electronic unit injector engines. So they use an injector lobe, an injector rocker arm, which is the wide one there in the middle, and then the unit injectors themselves to create the injection pressure. And because you're creating the injection pressure using the camshaft, that puts a lot of torsional vibration through the camshaft, and those rollers help to counteract that torsional vibration. This valve cover base is cracked right there. It probably wouldn't leak, but I'm gonna change it out for one that's not cracked. You can see the 20R2645 cat number there. That's a UTN number for a new cat head. That's the last of the 6 injectors. I've already had the other 5 out and got new O-rings on them and put them back in. I didn't find any cut or torn O-rings on any of them. Nothing to explain that little bit of fuel that I found in here inside the cylinder head when I was test running this thing. If there is a leak, I think it's really small, and it's probably one of these 6 injector bodies. So it'll probably have to get worse before you can even find it. I don't really even remember where I was at last, but here's where I'm at right now. It's late at night. I'm just down here dabbling around a little bit. I've got all the right sensors in all the right spots now. You got to really pay attention to sensor part numbers because they do sometimes change depending on exactly what engine you're working on. This is now a single speed and timing sensor engine now that I've changed the whole front structure. And that's the speed and timing sensor right there, reading off the cam gear, which is right in there. Boost sensor right here. Intake air temperature sensor right there. Fuel temperature sensor right here in the fuel filter base. And then the atmospheric pressure sensor is that one right there. There's 2 more on this side. Coolant temperature sensor right here in the regulator housing. And then the oil pressure sensor is right down here in this particular setup. So 7 sensors in total on the entire engine. Very simple, very reliable. These 3406E and early C15 engines are the very best examples of diesel engines ever produced in the 14 to 15 liter category. Hands down, no doubt about it, and probably always will be. There's a new used engine wiring harness right there. That's the entire engine wiring harness. That's all there is to it. And then the engine ECM will go on right here. Got a different valve cover base on it now that's not cracked. This one's in good shape. And this side of the engine's pretty well complete. Here's the ECM that's going on it. It's what Caterpillar calls an ADEM, ADEM2. I don't know what that stands for. Advanced Diesel Engine Management, maybe, I don't know. Just a guess. I've got the board out of the case here because I put a new battery on it, which is right there. That's a Rayovac FB2032H2 battery. And I don't think a guy can even get those batteries anymore. I looked for some here just a while back and could not find any available anywhere. I bought like 10 of them here 5 or 6 years ago, and I've still got a few of those left. They last like 20 years, but that may be all of them I'm ever able to get. So that's ready to go back together now. All right, I pretty well got it finished up and ready for a test run. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining every little detail. Just understand that there is a reason for pretty much everything you're seeing here. I just whipped this harness up. I actually kind of already had it built, but I had to pull a couple data link wires out of it, and then I added the throttle pedal wires into it. So this is going to allow me to connect my laptop to it so I can monitor sensors before and while it's running. And then I've got the throttle pedal wired in there too. It's back here, bolted on the back of the head. So I'll be able to throttle it up once it starts. I've run these engines like this a lot of times in the past with no coolant in them for a short period of time, and it doesn't hurt anything. A lot of the engines I've run like this, I tore down right after I ran them. And I have never found any sign of heat damage on anything at all. 20, 30, 40 seconds at a time is no big deal. I guess all I've really got to do now is get the fuel system primed up, and then we'll see if this re-engineered piece of shit's gonna run. I'm getting a little bit of fuel down here. I doubt if it's primed up very well, but I guess we're fixing to find out. Got 0 active codes right now, so all those U sensors are actually working at the moment. Here we go. got a little bit of oil on the ground, but that would have been coming out of the pump drive right here because there's no pump on it. I'm just looking in here for any sign of fuel going into the oil. Don't see anything, but I don't really expect to either. I don't know on that deal. It's probably just going to have to be run for a while and first confirm that it actually is putting fuel in the oil if it is, and then if it is, from there narrow down which injector it is. But it's just not bad enough yet to even figure out if it's happening, let alone which one. All right, it's the next day. I'm gonna fire it up one more time here real quick. Well, it's definitely not going to win any beauty contests, but it should be a pretty good engine, really. And I'm sure they'll paint it before they put it in, make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to get this thing loaded up and get it headed the right direction. Guess that's all I got for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.